So today I want to say to you, picture this. Charlotte Brontë, far from the moors of Haworth, staying in a bustling industrial city. Her first novel's been rejected, her father's recovering from surgery, and her world is completely unsettled. Yet, in the midst of it all, she began the story that would absolutely captivate readers for generations. So let's explore the beginnings of Jane Eyre and the moments that shaped its creation. Hello and welcome to this video about the story behind Jane Eyre. We all know the novel, one of the most enduring and beloved works in English literature. But how much do we really know about how it came to be? I thought I had a pretty good idea when I visited the Salutation Pub in Manchester, where Charlotte and her father Patrick stayed during his eye operation. So you might wonder why I hesitated when I said Salutation Pub. Well, if you've watched a few of my videos, you already know I have this terrible habit of getting my words muddled up. Sometimes it can be hilarious, sometimes it can be embarrassing, but sometimes I don't even know I'm doing it. And rightly so, someone pointed out in my video about Patrick having his eye operation in Manchester that was out a few weeks ago. Instead of calling it the Salutation Pub, I called it the Salvation Pub. I don't know why, I don't know where I got that from. So you might find that every time I say salutation, I might be thinking salvation, so I might hesitate. So bear with me. This is, obviously a talent I have for turning words into other things, but it drives me mad. I imagined her sitting upstairs in one of the rooms, pencil in hand, writing the opening chapters of Jane Eyre. But when I got home and started looking into it, I had sort of this light bulb moment. How on earth did I not realise? Of course, they wouldn't have stayed in a pub or an inn, especially not with Patrick recovering from his surgery. And of course, Patrick had very strong views about alcohol. So where did I get this idea from? It turned out the building that they actually stayed in, which was 83 Mount Pleasant, was a lodging house on the site of where the I've started to call it Salvation, was a lodging house on this site, but it was demolished years ago. When I asked about it, I heard rumours and stories that the lodging house was badly hit during the Blitz of 1940 during the Second World War. The site where Charlotte and her father once stayed was damaged so badly that it was demolished, and eventually the Salutation Pub was built in its place. I don't know how true that is. There are so many stories out there. That discovery got me thinking, what was Charlotte really going through in Manchester? Was writing Jane Eyre just sort of a way to pass the time, or was it something more? Did she find herself overwhelmed by the city like I did? And could being away from her family have given her sort of more freedom to take risks with her writing? See, I'm just back from this cold, crisp dog walk in the Yorkshire countryside, and the fresh air and the open skies and the endless landscapes are such a contrast to that noise and the busyness of city life. And I can't help but feel that this must have been the kind of freedom that Charlotte longed for while she was in Manchester. So let's dive into the story behind the creation of Jane Eyre. So I'm in the Salvation Pub here in Manchester now, and this is obviously now a proper pub, whereas at the time it was upstairs with the rooms where Charlotte and Patrick stayed when they were here. It's really bizarre to think I'm in an actual location, again, an actual location where Charlotte and Patrick were. It's kind of like these weird little connections that you get where you think, wonder what she was thinking, I wonder what she was doing while she was here. But yeah, everyone's nice here. I've just spoken to the chap behind the bar, and he's happy for me to film and look around, and I'm going to see, Shy Ben's getting out. I'm going to see if I can get an invite to have a look upstairs. You never know. You never know. So we know that Charlotte and her father didn't stay in a pub, but in a modest lodging house that once stood on the site of the Salutation Pub in Manchester. It was in Manchester in 1846 that Patrick Bronte underwent surgery to restore his sight. The procedure was a delicate and nerve-wracking one for both father and daughter. While Patrick rested and recovered, Charlotte found herself in this unfamiliar city. For a woman from a quiet Yorkshire moors, Manchester must have been overwhelming. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing and the city was noisy, smoky, plane. Oh, another plane. Thank you for coming out in your little planes right now. Sounds like little jets. Right. Come on, planes, go away. Must be, the RAF must be out somewhere. And while Patrick rested and recovered, Charlotte found herself in this unfamiliar city. For a woman from a quiet Yorkshire moor, Manchester must have been overwhelming. I mean, the Industrial Revolution was in full swing and the city was noisy, smoky and bustling, and it was a stark contrast to the rural landscape that she loved. Charlotte's letters from this time give us a glimpse of her state of mind, and in one letter to good old friend Ellen Nussey, she wrote, "Mr. Wilson says we have to stay here for a month at least. It will be dreary." And Mr. Wilson, by the way, is Patrick's surgeon. Her words reflect the discomfort and the boredom she was feeling, but there was more to it. During this period, Charlotte was also suffering from a painful toothache, and with her father recovering and little to distract her, it's easy to imagine how trapped she must have felt. No walks on the moors, no siblings to talk ideas through with, and of course no Tabby for comfort. Although Charlotte had been to cities before, she'd never stayed this long or spent so much time in one almost entirely alone. Patrick, although he was present, wasn't much help. I mean, he was recovering from surgery, so it meant he relied on her more than the other way around. For me, visiting Manchester as a visitor was overwhelming. That constant noise, the rush of people and the traffic. As a bit of a country mouse, I struggled, and I can only imagine how Charlotte, so far from her sisters and a quiet home in Haworth, must have felt. I wonder if Jane Eyre was her way of coping. Was it an escape from the physical and emotional discomfort she was experiencing? There's something poetical about the idea of Charlotte sitting in that now demolished lodging house, turning her solitude and her unease into the seed of one of literature's greatest works. Oh, mug update. Here we go. This is an oldie, this mug, and it's got a few chips in it, but it's a goodie. And I don't know if you can see, but if you look up closely, it says cosy, and there's also a dribble of tea. Sorry about that. Pleasant. Yes, this is my cozy mug, and you can see it's been through the wars. But it's just, look at that. That's perfect, isn't it? That's what you want from a mug. Keep your hands warm and drink a good brew at the same time. By the time Charlotte arrived in Manchester, her confidence as a writer had taken a hit. Her first novel, The Professor, had been sent over to several publishers but was repeatedly rejected. However, not all the responses were dismissive. Smith, Elder & Co., a London-based publisher, had sent her a glimmer of hope. In their rejection letter, they told her, "We do not consider the work on the whole satisfactory, but we think it's right to add that we shall be happy to examine, with a view to publication, any longer work that may be in progress by the same writer." This encouraging message arrived in late 1846, early 1847, just a few months before Charlotte and Patrick travelled to Manchester. That small seed of hope planted in the months prior to their trip must have stayed with her. Perhaps it gave her the motivation to try again and to channel her energy into creating something new. Sitting in that lodging house in Manchester, far from her sisters and the distractions of Haworth, Charlotte might have found the freedom she needed to let her imagination take flight. Away from prying eyes and questions about what she was working on, she had the space to experiment, take her time, and even start over if the story didn't go in the direction she wanted. Charlotte must have felt an incredible mix of emotions during this period. It was Charlotte who'd suggested to her sisters the idea of publishing their work, leading to the acceptance of their novels Wuthering Heights and Agnes Grey. Yet, despite her pivotal role encouraging them, her own work, The Professor, was rejected. While she was undoubtedly pleased for her sisters, it's hard to imagine she didn't feel a little bit of jealousy. Her work had been turned down, and the contrast between her own struggles and their successes must have weighed heavily on her. Did she feel pressured? Perhaps even resentful? It's hard to imagine she didn't, but that pressure might also have spurred her on, motivating her to create something extraordinary. And extraordinary it was. And like The Professor, Jane Eyre was bold and pioneering. It was a deeply personal work, weaving elements of Charlotte's life into its narrative. So that old saying, shy bairns getting out, it's worked for me before when I went to see The Birthplace in Bronte, and it's kind of worked for me again because I've managed to get upstairs in the Salvation Pub, and even though it's now a function room and it's one big room, I think it's easy to see how it would have been divided up and probably would have been small rooms. So I'm going to show you around. Maybe we use our imagination and you could imagine this is exactly where Jane Eyre was written. So let's have a look. So we have this fireplace that looks as if it would have been well used during its time, what with all the soot and obviously the stone hearth. So could this have been the fire that Charlotte sat in front of, kept warm while her father was in bed? We don't know, do we? But if I spin round and I'll show you. So you can see where the rooms were divided up. If I lift the camera, you can see the ceilings where the joists are. There's a large joist here, so I think this would have been one room. And then, obviously, as you go down, I'm sure the way the windows are, it would have been individual rooms. So I could be walking in any of the rooms at once. Was the accommodation. And obviously, if I spin round here, you can see there's more space down here. And again, if I show you the ceiling, you can see the old ceiling, which again gives me the idea that these rooms were divided. I mean, if you look at this one here, there is a very old wooden beam that goes straight across at a funny angle. So I think these would have been small individual rooms rather than the big space it is now. Manchester's dreariness, the isolation, and even her father's eye surgery seem to have seeped into the story. Jane's early life at Lowood School, with its harsh conditions, mirrored Charlotte's own experiences at Cowan Bridge School. The emotional and physical toll of that time likely left an imprint on her writing, and Mr. Rochester's blindness at the end of the novel could very well have been inspired by Patrick's temporary loss of vision during his eye surgery. In Jane Eyre, Jane is proposed to by slightly creepy, sorry, but that's my opinion, St. John Rivers, who suggested marriage not out of love, but because it would be advantageous for him as he prepares to go abroad as a missionary. Equally, Charlotte herself was proposed to by Ellen's brother Henry, a man who was also preparing for missionary work and saw marriage as something practical, finding a suitable wife to accompany him. This proposal was something Charlotte had to seriously consider, but ultimately rejected. She'd been exposed to the pressure of women in such roles, much like Jane, and this experience surely contributed to the feelings of entrapment and limitation expressed in the novel. Another loud plane. They must be out practicing today, but they're very loud. Shh. I don't know if you can hear that. Why is it when I sit down to record, someone gets a chainsaw out, a plane decides to fly really low, leaf blowers, you name it, I've had it all. Dog, not that the dog's with me today, but you have those times when you go, right, I'm going to do some recording. And everything outside decides to make an appearance. Charlotte's own experience as a governess, a role in which she felt isolated and often undervalued, is also reflected in Jane Eyre. The struggles and frustration that Jane experienced in her role as a governess mirrored Charlotte's own life during her time as a governess. Charlotte's experiences in this difficult position surely shaped the character of Jane and her longing for independence, self-respect, and a sense of belonging. Was the industrial city itself an influence? Possibly. The contrast between Thornfield Hall's oppressive grandeur and Jane's longing for freedom could reflect Charlotte's own feelings of being trapped in a busy, unfamiliar city, whilst dreaming of her peaceful home in the Yorkshire moors. In many ways, the confines of the industrial city must have felt like a stark reminder of the limitations placed on her as a woman and as a writer. So I like to think I am sat where Charlotte would have been, with maybe Patrick. I'm sat in front of this fire, here, in the pub. And it kind of gives me a really warm feeling. Maybe I'm where Jane Eyre was written. Maybe she sat here and she read through her writing and thought, is that right? Shall I call him Mr. Rochester or shall I call him Mr. Brown or something, you know? Is this where she came up with the name Jane? Did she think about calling her Alice or, I don't know, Elizabeth or something? Who knows? But it could have happened in front of this very fire, and that makes me feel very excited. It's incredible to think how Jane Eyre started in that small lodging house in Manchester. A story born out of Charlotte Bronte's solitude, struggles and determination. But what happened next was nothing short of transformative, not just for Charlotte but for literature itself. When Jane Eyre was published in 1847 under the pseudonym Currer Bell, it was an instant success. Readers were captivated by its honesty, intensity and of course its originality. Despite it being written by a woman, few knew this at the time. The use of the male pseudonym was a deliberate choice, as women writers in Victorian society were often viewed with suspicion. In fact, for years, people speculated about the identity of the author. Some believed that Jane Eyre had been written by William Thackeray's mistress, while others thought it was his governess. The mysteries often added to this novel's fascination and kept people talking for years. For Charlotte, the anonymity that came with the pseudonym allowed her to speak freely and powerfully. Jane Eyre defied convention. Jane wasn't a perfect heroine, and her love story with Mr. Rochester wasn't idolised. It was messy, it was complex, and it was deeply human. What's particularly fascinating is how Charlotte's own life mirrored many of the themes in the novel. Jane's struggle for independence and equality reflected Charlotte's own aspirations in a society that often limited opportunities for women. Her passion for self-expression is clear in her prose, and you can feel that raw emotion in every page. Charlotte herself acknowledged the personal nature of her writing, saying in a letter to a publisher, "To you, I am neither man nor woman. I come before you as an author only. It's the sole standard by which you have a right to judge me, the sole ground on which I accept your judgment." That boldness, the insistence on being judged by her work rather than her gender, was revolutionary at the time. I get so warm in my little room. I have a little room for if any of you want to know. I have a little room where I come and do all my Bronte stuff, and I also do sewing and things like that out here. And it's brilliant because it's away from the house and I can shut the door, and the only way to get to this room is you have to go outside and come back in again. And that kind of puts off other members of the family coming to disturb me. But it's quiet and it's warm, and I have all my beautiful things around me, my books and everything. And it's just a lovely place to be, and I like being out here. And I like recording videos out here, surrounded by all my Bronte bits and bobs. So. Jane Eyre didn't just carve out a place for Charlotte Brontë, it reshaped the landscape of 19th century literature. The novel is often considered one of the first to introduce a strong female protagonist whose inner life, emotions and desires are as important as the external plot. It paved the way for countless authors, both women and men, to explore more complex and authentic characters. Even today, the novel continues to resonate. Jane's story is one of resilience and self-respect in the quest for true love, not as fairy tale ideas, but as a connection rooted in mutual respect and understanding. For me, visiting the site where Jane Eyre began and walking upstairs at the Salutation Pub felt like stepping in the echoes of literary history. Even though the original building is gone, the spirit of what Charlotte achieved, I think, still remains. It's humbling to think that out of a time of rejection and isolation and discomfort came a world that inspired generations. Charlotte Brontë might have faced her share of challenges, but she emerged with a novel that is as powerful and relevant today as it was in 1847. I mean, for a woman from the quiet Yorkshire moors, Manchester must have been overwhelming. That was a notification going off. That doesn't help, does it? Should we try that bit again? Felt like I struggled there. A role in which she felt isolated and what's after? That sounds like a name of some sort of like monster. Ofter. Should we try that again? For Charlotte, the anonymity did I say that right? Anonymity. You know what I'm trying. Anonymity. For Charlotte, the anonymity. That's it now. I will be stuck with that word. I won't be able to say it now. Anonymity. Anonymity. Am I saying that right? Manchester's there. And of course, then we have Mr. Rochester. And then we have Mr. Rochester's blindness at the end of the novel. Why can't I say this? And then Mr. Rochester's blindness at the end of the novel could very well Thank you for joining me today. This video came from a place of curiosity, both for the building, the pub, the Salutation Pub, but also wondering if Charlotte's rejection of the professor also marked the end of this fixation that she had in Brussels for Monsieur Eyre. Did that rejection free her up to explore new ideas, to take risks with her writing? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, so let me know what you think in the comments below. I know I say it every week, but if you enjoyed this video or any of my videos, please do that whole likey, subscribey thing, because it really does help me out and it lets YouTube know that we want to watch more Bronte content. And maybe share my video on an online group or a book club or some friends. More the merrier, that's what I say. So have a good weekend, look after yourselves, and I will see you next Friday for more Bronte adventures. Take care. Bye.